All right, these are our Articles of Confederation notes. Use these to fill out your guided note sheet. Hang on to these, study them. This is what you're going to need in order to prepare for your assessment over this learning target. So, the Articles of Confederation is a style of government, the first style of government that independent baby nation America tries to adopt and govern itself with. Now, in 1776, TJ writes this little document of very little consequence called the Declaration of Independence. Sarcasm warning. So, 1776, he writes this monumental, groundbreaking letter, breakup letter to Britain. Boo hoo, too bad, so sad. And by 1777, they are writing the Articles of Confederation. So they've jumped right on this. They break up, they kick England to the curb. In the middle of the revolution, they are writing about how their new government is going to operate. So they are wasting no time here. The Articles doesn't get ratified or adopted by all the states until about 1781, and we still have a couple years before the revolution is officially over, but they already have the way they're going to rule things laid out, at least in a very rough form. All right, now King George was, of course, a monarch, and a monarchy we know has a king, a queen, which is different from an oligarchy where there's more than one ruler, different from a democracy where everyone has a say, different from a republic where people are chosen to represent the desires of the people. So the Americans had lived under a British monarchy for a lot of years, and they had a lot of complaints. So King George is not cutting it for the Americans, and they want something completely different. These thinkers like Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, all these guys want something different than what they have because obviously what they have is not working. If it was, we wouldn't have this little thing called the Revolution going on during this time. So, what kind of a government do the American colonists want? Well, they are sure as shooting not having a monarchy. So that's not even on the table for negotiations. There will not be a king. There will not be a monarchy. Now, we won't talk about it now, but interesting to note, there were a few people in America that liked the idea of having some kind of a monarch, some kind of a sovereign in office, just with a few more limitations than what the king had in England. But we get a president instead. So now they do want a government that is not too terribly powerful. They believe that the states should have the power in this situation because America is still a divided group of regions and areas and individuals. It's a patchwork of ideas and religions and histories and lineages and family trees and economies and languages. Different parts of America were very distinct from each other. And so they want to keep that. The American people are not ready to give up what they have and to just do what everybody else does. I mean, that's not how we are today. We are proud to be where we're from. We're proud to have our history and our beliefs and our traditions and everything like that. So they know that they want a government that's not too powerful, definitely no monarchy. They know that they want to kind of keep their individuality, and they think that maybe a confederation is a good idea. There were Native American tribes and some in along the East Coast where there were large confederations of different Native American tribes who joined together in times of war or for trade purposes and then disbanded when they weren't needed. So there was no strong central authority. They were just a patchwork of people that got together when it was convenient. Powhatan, Pocahontas's father, and the chief of the tribe there around Jamestown, he had this kind of a situation where he would have been the central authority figure over several tribes, but the tribes would only get together when it was necessary. So the Articles of Confederation, this document that is written, this new government for this new little baby nation that's being created, is the best government ever because it doesn't really work out and we still don't have it today. So, first, a definition confederation. A confederation is a group of individuals who are united together for a purpose. And this purpose, in this case, is to be a strong, independent nation. Like I said, it's created in 1777 because they're going to win, obviously. They know it, there's no doubt in their minds. And the Articles of Confederation explained how the 13 states were going to be governed as one nation. So, kind of an overview of what we have here. First of all, is that each state was independent. It had its own government, it did its own thing, and the people were pretty well ruled by their state leaders, not the federal government. Each state also sent a representative or representatives to the Congress of the Confederation, as it was called, for lawmaking. So the laws that were being made were being made directly by the people, by the representatives that the state sent. It's also important to note that in this one, Congress was the only branch of government. And in Congress, each state got one vote. Now, there were pros and cons to the Articles of Confederation. First, a pro. The states got to keep their power. That was a big deal because remember, we are trying to separate ourselves from an all powerful king and an all powerful parliament and government in Britain. So the states are dead set on keeping their own power and their own independence. Next, they had a weak central government, and that couldn't get out of hand. I mean, if you really understand how weak and ineffectual this government was in the Articles of Confederation, it's laughable. There is nothing that it could do, which is why partially it failed. But another pro is that they have a power to create a military that can be called together to protect states. We saw some of this when Washington sent in a militia to put down the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania. And another pro is that it set up the basic government framework. It gave us ideas about representatives and splitting power between the state and the federal level. Now, cons. Because there was only one branch, and that branch was Congress, they were in charge of making laws. There was no judicial branch that had the power to enforce any law that was made. Another con is that there was no power to tax. The the Congress could create a military to protect the states, but there was no way to pay for the military. And if they wanted to change anything in the Articles of Confederation, every single state, every single 13 states had to agree on the changes. You get 13 people together, they can't even decide what they want on their pizza, much less how you're going to make these huge decisions for the entire country and for the state. So, what we have here is a government that can pass laws but not force people to obey it. You cannot raise any money because there's no taxing. You can have a military to protect yourselves, but you can't pay those soldiers. And you have to get everybody to agree on what to do before you can change things. So, it's going to be a big deal to keep this government and to make it work. Now, you think, why can't you just throw it in the trash and start all over again? If a state doesn't like it, why can't you just go in and change it? Well, states have different needs. There are states that are mostly agricultural, and there are states that are packed with people and with industry and with factories later on during the Industrial Revolution. Also, states had different sizes. In the Articles of Confederation, every state had one vote. Virginia had a much larger population and a much larger landmass than, say, Rhode Island did. But in the Articles of Confederation, they both had one vote. And people had different opinions. One thing we're going to see is this battle between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, who was, of course, Washington's first Secretary of the Treasury, and then T.J. the first, or the third President of the United States. They're going to argue over who should have the most power, the federal government or the state governments. And yes, Hamilton liked to get inside Jefferson's mind. If you read a lot of Jefferson's stuff, it's pretty intense. He had a pretty deep hatred for Hamilton, and it went back and forth. So how do they fix the thing? This thing is obviously not going to work. Where do they even start to fix this problem? So the first step in solving your problem is that you have to admit that you have a problem. There were some people that liked the articles. They wanted to keep it mainly because it kept the federal government weak and it let the states have the power. But you can't run a country like that, as they quickly found out. So they meet in Philadelphia in 1787 to fix the problems. Why do they meet in Philadelphia? Because if we learn anything from any Rocky movie, Philly is where winning gets done. So they get together, and the articles have so many problems, they actually end up just throwing the whole thing out and creating a brand new government. So this thing turns into something called the Constitutional Convention, where they end up writing our Constitution that we have today. Now, some of the major changes that they meet during the industrial, or the, that's good, during the Constitutional Convention, I don't know where industrial came from, is that instead of having one branch of government like they did under the Articles, they now have three. They have a lawmaking body, the legislative branch, which is Congress. They have an executive branch, which is the presidency. It carries out laws. And they have a judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, where they interpret laws. Also, instead of the states being the same exact having the same exact vote regardless of the size or the population, instead of making them equal like they were in the Articles of Confederation, uh, the Constitution actually makes your number of representatives based on your population. So large states like Virginia are going to have more votes and more representatives in Congress than small states like Rhode Island. And there are some plans that go with that, which we will look at later. Also, the Constitution requires states to treat visitors from other states the same as their own people. In the Articles of Confederation, when you crossed a state line, it was like you were entering a foreign country. And they did not have to treat you the same way or afford you the same rights as their own citizenry. This was a time when America didn't even have one independent currency. This was where different states had different types of money that they were using, different amounts. It was worth different values based on where you went. So it kind of creates this country out of several different states. And then also in the Articles of Confederation, I said that it took every single state to the change the government, to change the laws. In the Constitution, they realize that's not going to work, and they realize that they're only going to get more states, and it's going to be more difficult the more they grow. So they create this thing where you can change the government with a three-quarters majority. So instead of 13 different states voting to change something, if you can get nine to vote to change it, then you can go ahead and move ahead with what you need. And then lastly, it requires the states to follow laws passed by Congress. We said that one of the things about the Articles was that Congress could make laws, but it couldn't enforce them. So the things like the National Bank, and we'll see that when we get to court cases, there's a case called McCulloch v. Maryland, where Maryland does not want to have the National Bank. They don't want to pay taxes to support it, and they refuse to have it. Supreme Court comes in and says you have to have it because it is a federal institution. And so now the states have to follow laws that are passed by Congress. So the Articles of Confederation, very weak, very ineffectual, not a lot of power to do much of anything, but it was a first step towards creating an American government. The Constitution, much more balanced, much more indebted to Enlightenment ideas, much more Republican than this crazy idea that they were trying to accomplish in the articles. So pause, go back where you need to, catch up on anything, find Everything that you miss, make sure you fill out the notes completely in there, that you get everything right, and just be ready